Hey everyone, how's it going? So I'm here for a Friday Reads. Yeah, it's Thursday night once again. You'll be seeing this Friday morning, so happy Friday. Yeah, I'm glad to be back recording a Friday Reads. It feels like it's been a while since I've done a Friday Reads. I don't know why that is. It has been like maybe two weeks or so. But anyway, I I'm glad to be back recording them just because I love Friday Reads. They're probably my favorite video to record, and probably my favorite kind of video to watch as well as just general am reading videos, kind of. I love them. As much as I love the more substantive videos with like book reviews or book talks and tags, of course, tags are fun. Much as I love those, I do just love the general reading update. Um, so yeah, anyway, it is kind of a nice, pleasant Iowa evening. It's cool out. It's obviously we're in full spring mode here, so that's very pleasant. I've been walking to campus every day, getting some exercise. Um, the walk to campus, to and back from campus, totals about 5 miles for me, and I'm doing it with a backpack full of books. So it is kind of a little exercise. It's not anything terribly intense, but it makes me feel like I'm being a little bit active, which is important especially when you're in grad school where it's easy to become sedentary. But anyway, that is not what we're here to talk about. Um, so I have several books, and I'm gonna try to go through them in a relatively timely manner. I always say that at the beginning of a video, and it never happens. So we will see. But I'm gonna do the first four in kind of a group. So they are this anthology of Latin poetry. This is really a collection of various translations by many different translators. So there will be some people you've probably heard of in here. Edwin Arlington Robinson is in here. Muriel Spark actually does some of the translations in here. Who else? Robert Fitzgerald. Rolf Humphreys, who did a translation of Ovid's Metamorphoses and Virgil's Aeneid, which I have both read and quite liked. Louis MacNeice, who's a 20th century American poet. Christopher Marlowe did some of the translations in here. So yeah, it really is just a collection of translations from throughout the ages. So it has a decent variety. And what I like about that is that if you don't like one translator, you're not stuck with them. So you don't lose hope once you realize that you don't like a certain translator. And also, a lot of the translations are older. So the poetry is sort of written in a sort of older style. And I find with these older, Greek and Roman poets, that tends to work really well because they are old. So it makes me feel more like I'm reading an old author, and plus it adds a certain level of eloquence for me, the sort of archaic style, which probably is kind of frivolous, but that's just how I am. Um, and then the other three are in the same vein. So 3 volumes. So we have the Idylls of Theocritus, Greek poet who is most known for starting the tradition of pastoral poetry. Propertius, a Roman love poet, and Horace. This is Odes and Epodes, who is a lyric poet who writes on a variety of subjects. He writes love poems. He writes poems just kind of about life and his own sort of life philosophy and stuff of that sort. So he writes about a variety of subjects. But yeah, these three are absolute titans of ancient Greek and Roman poetry, and and the thing is with Horace, I have been looking for a good translation, and this is really the first translation that I've bought where I've been anywhere remotely satisfied with what I've been reading. The other translations have not given me the sense that I'm really experiencing Horace the way that he should be as a great poet. It feels very watered down and a bit pedestrian as always. This one is not so much. It's still kind of a bit lackluster, but it's better than the others I've read. The poems of Propertius that I've read so far, I have not really found much in here yet that has really struck me in the way that poems that I love do. Um, yeah, again, it just feels kind of watered down, not very eloquent, not very poetic, for poetry. Just not giving me what I go to poetry for. And the same thing with this volume of Theocritus. Just again, there are some good lines that are, somewhat okay, but on the whole, I'm just not finding it to be good and, readable in the way that English poetry that is really good is, which is sort of what I look for in a translation. So, yeah, I'm going to keep reading these, though. I'm hoping that they will dawn on me, all of them. I'm hoping. It may not happen, which would be unfortunate because I did spend money on all three of these volumes. And now, that leads me to my next point, which is this collection. And this collection is a collection of Roman poetry, and it has generous selections of Propertius and Horace. I originally was going to steer clear of those in here for now, because I had the individual volumes. But just this morning, I went and I read some of the translations of Horace in here. And they were so good. They were so much better than the ones I read so far. It hit me that this is how poetry feels, that's what hit me when I read the translations in here. And the translations that I read of Horace one was by Merrill Spark, I remember that. Another was by Edwin Arlington Robinson, who's a great American poet. And another was by George F. Witcher, and I don't really know him, but I liked his translation. And it was the first time reading Horace where I really got the sense that this is a great poet that I am reading. And so, yeah, I want to read Horace in here. I want to read Propertius in here, because he's obviously there. And it makes me look forward to reading the rest of this anthology, but it also, again, makes me sad that I spent money on these volumes. The Theocritus I can't really replace with an anthology like this, because he's obviously not in here. But yeah, so it's a little frustrating. But I'm gonna keep plugging on with these 3 individual volumes and see if I find stuff that I like more. And I'll keep reading the anthology. All right. Moving on now. I have here a Pre-Socratics Reader. So all of the Pre-Socratic philosophers wrote works that we know of, but none of them survived in their entirety. All of them survive in fragments. Some of the fragments are more extended than others. Some of them are literally like one line. Others are like pages of verse, but still not too much that's all that substantial. And most of those fragments come from places where that philosopher's work was quoted in another writer's work. Anyway, so this is just a collection of the fragments that we have of many of the Pre-Socratics, and so yeah, it makes for relatively quick reading because it's in fragments. There are no huge sustained areas of prose. I mean, like, look at that. That's one fragment, so that's quite big. But then there's that, and I'm liking the Pre-Socratics. They're very interesting thinkers. They were sort of rediscovered in modern times by people like Heidegger and Nietzsche, who really liked them, even though they had been out of favor for a long time in philosophy, because of the influence of Socrates, because he sort of came along in philosophy and revolutionized philosophy, sort of in opposition, in a sense, to the Pre-Socratics, and then the Pre-Socratics were kind of neglected for a long time. But anyway, so yeah, they're just very interesting. It would be hard for me to really talk about this book in depth here, because there are many different thinkers contained in here, so I could talk about a lot of different ideas. But I'm liking it. I do feel like there is a peril in reading the Pre-Socratics, though, because their work survives in fragments, often 1 or 2 lines. I feel like it would be easy to read a lot of profundity into what are probably meaningless statements that have survived. But I honestly kind of have a weird enjoyment with that sort of thing, so makes them kind of perfect for me. So yeah, anyway, moving on now. The last 2 are, in a certain sense, a pair, but not really. So the first one is Possessed by Memory, The Inward Light of Criticism by Harold Bloom, his latest book. It's a big thing. It's over 500 pages. And yeah, this book really is right up my alley. Really, he just discusses dozens of poems that have just meant a lot to him throughout his life. And each chapter in this book is one poem, and he just briefly discusses it, quotes it at length, and just talks about what it means to him. And that's kind of the perfect book for me. I love that sort of thing. Just a really brief discussion of great poems. And it's relatively easy to read because each chapter is quite short. And I think it's hitting me lately that reading about poetry is just about as important as reading poetry, because I think it can bring out the qualities in certain poems that perhaps you as a reader didn't see initially. And books like this are really good for that. So I'm enjoying it. It is a little bit sad because he's very much, Harold Bloom is like 89. He's going to be 90 soon. So he's been in bad health for years. He's been to the hospital several times in the past decade. It's actually, honestly, from what I can gather, it's a little bit remarkable that he's made it as far as he has. I'm glad he has, but anyway, yeah. So he's writing this book very much with the fact that he's not long for this world in mind, which makes it very melancholy. But if this is his last book, then I think it'll be a good way to go. I think it's a really good book. I'm not that far into it. I'm like 60, 70 pages into it. Yeah, he starts with the Hebrew Bible and then just moves forward through literature. He goes through Shakespeare, of course. He goes through the Romantics, and then some modern poets. And one modern poet that he goes through, this is a good transition to my last book here. One modern poet that he goes into is James Merrill. He actually knew James Merrill. It's relevant because I am still working on James Merrill, Life and Art by Langdon Hammer. I have about 150 pages left. I am hoping to finish it. I'm planning to finish it. I am going to finish it by the end of this month. I may see if I can manage to finish it by the end of this weekend, and perhaps even do a video about it this weekend. But that's ambitious. But I'm still loving that. I see it as a book that I will go back to repeatedly whenever I revisit James Merrill's poetry. I will go back to what Langdon Hammer has said about it to help me through it and get some insights into it. And again, like going back to what I said before, I think that that's important with poetry sometimes, to get what other people have said about it, to sort of get a grasp of the poem. When I first read a poem, it almost always flies over my head on a first reading, and I almost always read a poem a second time. And even after the second time, I rarely feel like I know what the poem is doing fully. Especially if it's modern poetry. With older poetry, that's not so much true. But even so, I always read a poem twice when I read it, and I never come out of that quite feeling like I fully get it to the extent that you can ever really get a poem. And so what usually happens after that is I set that poem aside, mark it off with one of these tags, and often come back to it months later, and often something will hit me about it after a month of it sort of coagulating in my subconscious, I suppose, and something will click and I'll love it, and suddenly something will make sense. What I think is good about reading about poems by a critic like Langdon Hammer or Harold Bloom, is that I think that they help that process. They help quicken that process. They help you sort of click with the poem more quickly than you would if you had to let it stay in your subconscious for 3 months. Anyway, whatever this even means, what I'm saying. So yeah, and again, to go back to the book I'm supposed to be talking about, the biography is great. It's just great reading. Again, the parts where he talks about the poems are awesome. And it's also a very moving book, just a great story of a man's life. James Merrill is an endlessly fascinating person and writer. And interestingly, going back to Harold Bloom, both Harold Bloom and Langdon Hammer regard the Book of Ephraim, the first third of James Merrill's trilogy, called The Changing Light at Sandover, which he wrote about his and his partner David Jackson's communications with spirits from the underworld through a Ouija board. Both of them regard the Book of Ephraim as his greatest work. So it makes me all the more excited to read the Book of Ephraim, because I have a volume of it, of just the Book of Ephraim, and yeah, I need to read it. Perhaps when I'm done with this biography, I will. So yeah, that's my Friday reads. Again, if anyone has any thoughts, I'm always glad to hear. I'm always glad to have a conversation with you commenters and fellow booktubers. So if you have thoughts, let me know. Or if you just want to say hi, let me know. If you want to let me know what you're reading, I would love to hear. And yeah, I don't know. I hope you all have a nice weekend. And yeah, I will sign off now, and I will go perhaps read and then go to bed. So anyway, bye guys.